Welcome to another video in the TimCo Retail Manager course. This course focuses on real-world application development. This is a series, so the way to get the most out of it is to start at the beginning and watch through in order. However, if you're just interested in the topic this video covers, that's fine too. Think of this series like a bunch of Lego bricks. Each is valuable on their own, but seeing them put together is even more valuable. In this video, we'll be setting up WebAPI with authentication. We'll just do the introductory setup since we haven't planned out the application yet, but we know we need certain key pieces, and this is one of them. Now, if you're a Patreon supporter at the $5 per month level or higher, make sure you head over to get the latest source code. So let's get started. Let's right-click on our solution that I have open here and say Add New Project and select from the Web category ASP.NET Web Application, and notice that it is the .NET Framework version. We're starting off with the .NET Framework, not .NET Core, because we want to simulate where businesses are today and what you'll see in the actual workplace. And then we're going to simulate the idea, through actually doing it, of moving to .NET Core, because that's also something that you're going to have to do in today's marketplace. And so you'll have the benefit of both the where we are right now and where we're going. So let's give us a name. Let's call it the TRM Data Manager, which TRM is the TimCo Retail Manager. So the TimCo Retail Manager Data Manager, which is the API layer. We'll hit OK. And I also have .NET Framework. Let's move that up to 4.7.2 before we hit the OK. So 4.7.2 TRM Data Manager is the name, and it's going to ASP.NET Web Application. Once we do, we get this screen right here. We get to select which version we want. And I'm going to select WebAPI, which actually gives me MVC and WebAPI. I'm not going to use MVC directly in this, but I will use a little bit, just enough to give me some help pages and maybe some other pages too in the future. But for right now, I'll leave it as standard. And I'm also going to check the individual user authentication. So change the authentication to individual user accounts. Okay, so you have WebAPI. These two are checked, MVC and WebAPI. I'm not going to use Docker for right now. I'm not going to use Windows Forms. And I'm not going to set up unit tests at this time. So we hit OK. And this will scaffold out for me a API that will actually run as is, but we'll make some modifications to it right away. Whenever you add a new project to a solution, it's a great time to do all of your initial setup, including your NuGet packages, making sure you look at those and see if you can upgrade. In this case, we're going to have quite a few NuGet packages to upgrade. So if you go to updates here, we'll see that we have, let's see, 15 or so? Yeah, 15. So I'm going to say select all and uncheck Bootstrap. The reason I'm going to uncheck Bootstrap is because 3.3.7 is a totally different animal than 4.2.1. So Bootstrap 3 and Bootstrap 4, there's some major breaking changes. And instead of trying to go through the hassle of figuring that out and fixing that for what really is a almost nothing page for MVC, I'm going to leave that alone. So I'm going to leave it at 3. The rest of them, though, get upgraded. So I'm going to say update. And it's going to prompt me for I believe the licensing will prompt me. And just hit OK to that, or yes. There we go. And there's the updates it's going to say it's going to do. And there's the license acceptance for all the different areas. And hit accept. And it's going to upgrade all those packages, remove the old ones, and put the new ones in place. And it's going to ask about this. Do you want to replace this because it's already in place? And I say yes, because again, it's a whole lot easier because we're starting off. What's the worst that can happen? In this case, I believe it's the help page, creates a newer version of a start CS HTML under the help page. So that's great. That's fine. So I hit yes. It's not going to hurt anything, again, because it's all boilerplate code at this point. So the worst thing that happens is I have to delete this project and start over. Not a big deal. All right, so let's close out this and start looking through the different settings we have here. Let's go to App Start. And if we look here under the route config, and this is where the marriage between MVC and WebAPI comes into play, we have a route here called route config where it says controller, action, and ID. This is for MVC, which again, we won't use a whole lot, but it's in place in case we need it. Down here under WebAPI config is a different route, and that's for the API. So API /controller /ID, and that's its routing engine or route path. So if it has an API to start, so your domain name /API, it's going to go to the API routing. If it does not have it /API, it's going to go to the MVC routing. So that's one thing to note. So if you're looking for how to tweak that, that's where it's at. Now let's open up the identity config. And in here, and let's unpin this for a minute. In here is where some settings are for setting up WebAPI. And it might be of interest, especially when it comes to authentication. For example, right here is the user validator. This validates if a username is acceptable or not. And the default is what I'm going to keep, which is no, we don't allow only alphanumeric usernames because that would mean that an email address could not be a username, which is what I prefer. And require unique email is set to true, which means a user can't have more than one account under the same email address, which is what I prefer, again. The password validator, I'm not a huge fan of the password validator, the way it's set up. It's not a great, strong password, but it is an annoying password. It only requires a length of 6, but it requires a non-numeric, non-alpha character, meaning it has to be a special character, and it requires a digit, and it requires a lowercase, and it requires an uppercase. So all 4 of these are true, which means you have to have an uppercase, lowercase, number, and special character, and in your password, but it only has to be 6 characters long. I would prefer to see this longer and maybe turn off that one, the special characters. Now you can still have special characters even that turned off or set to false, but that way it just makes your passwords a little less restrictive. Again, though, I'll leave it at default. That's fine for now. And some of these things, we're going to leave them as default, but maybe later come back and fix them or change them. But I'm a firm believer in only doing what you know you need to do. So if I think, well, down the road, we might have this or might have that, I might keep an eye out for those kind of things, but I won't do the work for them now. Because half the time or more, those things don't come to pass. And so why spend time on something that might happen when I have plenty to do already? Okay, so at this point, let's just go ahead and start this and get it running. It's going to load up a new version of my browser, and it's going to go to this URL, which it's reserved for this application. And there we go. I've got this is the MVC portion. So I can go to /API, which is actually /help if I click on API. /help gives me information about what's already here. Basically the kind of defaults, which is the values controller, and also the accounts controller, which is part of the authentication system. Now, if we click on, say, this API /values, notice that it tells me how to call it. using a get command. So get and then API/values, and what it's going to return, which is a couple of strings. Now, if I were to call this, I would say API/values. And I get this error message in XML that says authorization has been denied for this request. That's because this endpoint has been secured. Let's see that. So if we go to controllers and go to the values controller, notice this right at the top, it says authorized. And what that says is, in order for you to call any of the endpoints in this values controller, you have to be logged in. Notice there's that get command right here. So API/values. So that get would have returned a string array with 2 values in it. But because we're not authorized, we can't even call it. So let's work at getting authorized. Now, I have seen some people that create this method that creates an initial admin account. And I admit that's really tempting to do because of the fact that every time I create a new database for this authentication system, I'm going to have to create a new admin account. But the downside of that is that then I have something in my code that has a default admin account information, username and password. And I'm not a big fan of that. And so instead of doing that, I'm going to take a little more work on my own self in order to prevent my password getting out there, a default admin account. So I'm going to create it manually every time I create a new database. But here's the deal. Except in testing, you don't create databases very often, especially not brand new ones. You'll do this once in production, probably once in staging, and in your dev environment, you might do a little bit more, but it's actually doubtful. You'll probably do it once and then be done. So I can live with that in exchange for a little bit more safety when it comes to my application security. So what we're going to do is run this and get it started. And I'm also going to open up a tool called Postman. Now, if you're not familiar with Postman, let me open up a web browser here, a different one. Go to getpostman.com and download the app. Postman is a tool for making API development simple. That sounds like something we need to do. What Postman does is it allows us to call APIs from this tool. So I'm going to call this API from this tool. So let's see this in action. The first call I need to make is to register a new user. So I'm going to get a post call. I'm going to start off with my HTTP localhost :57306. And it may be different on your machine, that port may be, because it creates a new port for every new application you create. So /API/account/register. Now, how do I know that path? Well, let's go back over here to our API and go to the help. Right down here, it's a post command, API/account/register. If you click on it, it even says, here's what to send me. Email address, password, confirm password. So we can do that. So we come down here to this tab called body, and we select raw. And then over here we get a drop down. It says text right now. We want JSON, which is application/JSON. And now I can paste in or build, in this case I'll build it, our JSON string. And JSON is essentially pretty easy to learn. You just put the curly braces around objects and you put square braces around arrays. So in this case, I have an object and the first piece is email. And so I'm going to put in quotes for both the parameter as well as this value, put in quotes. It's test at, Tim at IamTimCorey.com. And then the password, my super secret password here is PWD12345 period. That has an uppercase, a lowercase, a number, and a special character. Confirm password. The same password. So I've got a post going out to API/account/register. Let's zoom in a little bit there. So there's my URL. I've got in the body, I have a raw selected and JSON/applications/JSON. And then in here, I have my 3 values. And inside curly braces, there's email, password, and confirm password. Okay, so that's the values I'm sending. If I hit send, it comes back, and let's zoom in down here, and we see the status is 200 OK. And if you're not familiar with HTML or HTTP status codes, 200 is the yes, everything worked. So in this case, everything worked. We created our username and password. So now we can start using it. Let's actually create a new tab here. I'm going to just copy the base string here. And now I'm going to get what's called a token. Now a token, what it does is when you log in, so we're going to pass a username and password. When you log in, it gives you back this string that you can use saying, I got this from you, so therefore I'm authorized. And it will last, it depends on how you set it up. We're going to leave it at default for now. So default, I believe, is 2 weeks. Now you can make it last less than that or longer than that if you want. A lot of companies, what they'll do is they'll make it last for, say, 30 minutes. But then they'll have a refresh token that will allow them to keep refreshing it. So that if you continue to use your application, you stay logged in longer. Other applications will leave you logged in for long periods of time. So in ours, I think that staying logged in for long periods of time, not a big deal. So we'll leave it like that. So to get this, we put in our path to the base path to the API/token. And this is a get command. Now, if you're not familiar with get versus post, the very, very basic, simplest explanation is that get is asking for data and post is telling you to save this data. So you may send data up with a get command, and we will, but the reality is what we're asking for is for data to come back. With a post, what we're saying is the data I'm sending you, I want you to save it. So that's kind of the difference. So here, when we did this post, we were saying, I want you to save this information. And it said, yep, we did that, and you're good to go. Over here, I'm going to say, I have some information. I want you to use that to give me information back. In this case, I want my token. So our path/token, notice there's no API there. It's just our path/token. Now we need to send data with it. So we go to body. And this one we have to do x-www-form-URL encode. And the reason why is because it's essentially going to put that at the end of the URL. This is how this one call works. So we come down here to our key and we type grant_type, and the value is password. The next key is username, and the value is tim@imtimcorey.com. The next is password, and the value is pwd12345, period. So we have a GET call to our /token. That's our URL. In the body, we have this form encoded. And we have 3 values: grant type, username, and password. Notice that this time it's not asking for confirm password because we're not creating this. We're just saying this is my password. And so it's either going to work or it's not. So let's run this. And notice now I have in the body down here some information. First, we have the access token. And the access token is that value I was talking about that basically authorizes us to say this is who we are and we've been authorized. Now, this is a bearer token. And it expires in, and that's not really very helpful, but don't worry, down here we have a translation. It expires on Thursday, January 31st at 4:16 a.m. And the username is tim@imtimcorey.com. So that's all the information we get back. So with that, I can copy this whole access token. Now, once I have this, I can make a call. So let's go back over to our API. We'll go back to the help page over here and go to API/values. This is the one that gave us problems before. So now we can open up a new tab. We can say HTTP, localhost, and we'll select this one to start, but we'll take this out and say API/values. This is a GET command. Now, if I just run this as is and hit send, I'm going to get that same error. Now, notice there's that 401 unauthorized. That's the HTTP status code of unauthorized. And we also get the message that says authorization has been denied for this request. So we can't just call it directly because we have to be authorized. Well, how do we authorize something? We go over to headers, and in the headers, we say the key is authorization, and the value is bearer, and then a space, and then you paste in that token. Now let's make this call again. And there we go. So we have an array with value 1 and value 2 being returned because we are authorized because of this token right here. So authorization, bearer, space, paste in your token in the header. You do all that, and now you're authorized to get these values. That'll become very important in the future because what will happen for our WPF app is we're going to log in. It's going to have to store this token. And then it's going to have to send back that token as the authorization every time it makes a call that is secured. Not only will that tell us that they're allowed to get into our application, but it'll even tell us who they are. And let's actually kind of show that off a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and close out this browser, which will also stop the API. And I'm going to make a couple of tweaks here. So we already say we have to authorize in this values controller. But what we're going to do is I'm going to show off a couple of different things that we're going to do in this API to make it a little bit better. So what we're going to do is we're going to get the user ID of whoever's logged in here just as a demonstration. So the first thing we're going to do is up in the using statements, we have to add a using for Microsoft.ASP.net.identity. And this will help us get the extension method that we need to get the information about the user. Let's say string user ID equals request context dot principal dot identity dot get user ID. And what this does is it says, okay, you've been authorized, great, but we could have 10,000 authorized users. We need to know who you are. And so we can grab the person's identity and say, okay, in that identity, one of the things you have is a user ID. Please give that to me. And that's going to be stored in our string. Now I can pass that back just to show that we have it. Oops. Didn't copy. There we go. So I'm going to pass that back in my string array. Now, if you're a little bit lost, no problem. Just hang on just a second and I will show you where we're going with this. Once that starts up, I'm going to make the same call to the API/values, which is the controller we just modified. Now, I'm still have my same bearer token, but remember, that lasts for the next 2 weeks, so I'm good. I hit send. Now I have 3 values. And one of the values is this value right here, which looks an awful lot like a GUID, because it is. That's my user ID. How do I know that? Well, if I were to highlight this and copy it, and then go back to Visual Studio, let's go ahead and hit stop, it's easier. Go to SQL Server Object Explorer, open up my SQL servers. I have a database here called TRM Data Manager. Sounds an awful lot like my project over here for WebAPI. This is the table the database that was created by Entity Framework for the authentication system. One of the tables in here is ASP.NET users. So if I say view data, there's one person in here, Tim at imtimcorey.com. The password is a bunch of nonsense. It's not nonsense. It's a one-way encryption, essentially. And so that's not really helpful to us. That's just hash. And there's also a security stamp. But at the very beginning, we have this ID. Now, if you remember from before, let's open up Notepad and bring it up here in just a minute. This is what I got from the Postman. And if you compare that with this, they're the same. So it pulled that ID off of my record and said, that's who you are. Now, I could have grabbed the email address or something else, but I think this provides the most information for me because it allows me then to uniquely identify this user, even if their email address changes. So we're going to use this to kind of further limit things. So right now, I'm just saying it doesn't matter what role you're in, because I'm not actually even in a role. We don't have even created roles. We're going to get to that in a future video. But right now, I'm just authorized, which means I can log in, do whatever, essentially. But in the future, what we'll do is we'll say, okay, who are you? Once we figure that out, based upon who they're logged in as, not who they say they are. So we're not going to ask them. We're going to get that off of their login information. Once we do, then we can say, okay, based upon who you are, this is what you have access to. And that's how we tighten the net even further as to what they can see. So if there are 2 sales representatives that can both see sales, but only for their own sales, we'd only have to say, are you a sales representative? because then we can further define it by this ID and say, okay, you're a sales representative, but you're also Tim Corey. Therefore, you can only see Tim Corey's sales, not everybody's sales. So we don't have to have this very complicated system by which we track different groups and permissions. We only have to have a simple set of groups, and then beyond that, we can tighten things further by who they are and look that up based upon their user ID, not from what they tell us. That way it's totally secure. Or at least very secure. Nothing's ever totally secure. Okay, so now we have that. Let's talk about the return types. And this is a debate, and it kind of depends on how you want to set things up. Right now, the example returns the actual values. So IEnumerable of string, or a string, or a void. That's the example code they gave us. Now, if you notice when we actually call it in Postman, one of the things it does is it returns this 200 OK, which isn't anywhere in here. And so what happens is if you return actual value or a void, if it succeeds, it's going to say it's a 200 success. If it fails because it crashes, then it will give an error, and I believe it's in the 500 range. And if you don't allow them to log in, if you say you're not authorized, they get a 401. And if it can't find the controller or the method, then it returns a 404, page not found. So that happens by default. However, we can be a little bit more specific about it if instead of returning the actual type, what we do is return an iHTTP action result. Let me show you how that would work. So I return this instead. Instead of returning this new, I would wrap it in OK. So I return OK, then inside the OK, I can return the actual value. The benefit there is I have a number of different options that I can send back. I could send back a not found, which is a 404, or an exception, or an unauthorized, but I can also choose bad request, or conflict, or redirect. So I have a little bit more granularity in what I can return. The downside of it is, if you scan through, how do you know what GET returns? Sure, it returns an iHTTP action result, but what's the actual data types? This doesn't tell you. You have to come down here and look at the actual return to see what the data type is. And in this case, it's even wrapped inside of an OK. It's a little more obtuse. I'm not a big fan of this. I like the additional options for what I can send back, but the reality is it makes for painful reading. So it's up to you which way you want to go. If you want more control over your result list, then this is the way to go. But you're going to have to do a little more documentation or in some way much more clearly state what's going on, because this was a string array, right? If I cut this out and type test, that also works. So I can change my type accidentally and there's nothing to stop me. That's not really what I want. So I'm not going to do that for this API. I'm going to leave it just like that, where we return the actual type like it's a method. It will still wrap it in proper HTTP response codes. I just don't have quite as much easy granularity on the response code I send back. All right, so I think we're about done here. Now I'm going to leave this values controller in place for a little while because it's a great example of how to do things. There's a couple of kind of tweaks you have to do with APIs. For example, this is an MVC controller. How do I know? Because it inherits from controller. Whereas this is an API controller. I know because it inherits from API controller. So kind of a subtle difference. They look pretty much the same. It's just that little bit of difference. The other thing is I have now this example of how to get a user ID. Therefore, I'm kind of good there. I kind of have that baked in and ready. And so I'll leave it in place for a while. And then once we have a few API endpoints under our belt, then I'll go ahead and take it out. I really don't like example code living too long in my application. But at the same time, I like to have an example to look at, especially one that I know works. So the next step we're going to do is go to Team Explorer and go to Changes. And notice there's a lot of changes. There's a lot of changes. Now, normally I'd be a little more thorough in reviewing this, but the reality is I just added my project. I know that there's a ton of stuff, and I know it's all okay. So I'm going to hit Stage. And I just do a real quick scan to make sure that no file gets added that I don't want. For example, the one thing I don't want in here, which is not in here, but the one thing I don't want is I don't want my packages. So those aren't in here, which is good. There is, however, this whole scripts folder that has a whole bunch of JavaScript, which I could have gotten from NPM or another package manager. That's how this template is built. Not a big fan, but that's how it's built. And so I'm going to leave it alone for now. I'm not going to touch it because I also don't necessarily need all these scripts. And at some point I'll come through and clean them up once I have a better handle on if I even want the MVC side of things at all. But I'm going to leave it for now because I'm not quite sure if I'm going to have a little bit of a landing page for my API just to tell people, okay, here's the API, this is what it does, and here we can get more information about it. So I'll leave this for now, but it's not a great solution. Besides that, all the rest of the files seem to be okay. They seem to be valid files to add. So now I've staged them all. What I'm going to do, and I staged them, I don't know if you caught that or not, but I just right-clicked and said stage. Now, if they're staged, I had to say unstage. But remember that you take changes and move them into a stage and then commit them as a group. In this case, add the Web API project. That's good enough. I hit commit staged and go to sync. I'll do my fetch to make sure there's no new change in the server. There's not, which I knew, which is why I didn't do it at the beginning of this project. But in a normal day's work, especially in a team environment, you'd want to do a pull first and then do your changes. But in this case, I already knew that I had the latest version. So now I can just go ahead and hit push. And so now my changes are on master in GitHub. Now, again, remember that I'm simulating a one-man shop or one-person shop. I am not simulating the idea of a team environment with team concerns. So I just committed to master and I pushed to the remote master. I didn't do any pull requests. I didn't do any separate branching and all the rest because I'm one person. So if you get into a team or even two people, you might want to start thinking about separate branches for your changes. But in this case, especially starting out, I'm not going to branch. I'm going to work right on master. Okay. So that's it for this part of the project. We have an API layer in place, just basic, but it's set and ready to go for our next step in getting this project set up. Remember, we're doing a minimum viable product. So once we get the main pieces in place, Then we're going to start planning out how do you want to see this to work and what major feature do you want to work first and try and get just that feature in. So that's kind of the roadmap a little bit. We've got to put WPF in place, which is our front end. We've got to have our SQL Server Data Tools project in place because that's where we're going to have our SQL Server for everything besides authorization and authentication. And then we need to plan out that, again, that one piece we're going to put in place first. Okay? Thanks for watching. And as always, I am Tim Corey.